Hello and welcome everybody to this episode of the Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. Today we have a very, very special guest, Maria Jimenéz Rojas, Maria Jimenéz Rojas of Daarnhouwer, who's located in the Netherlands. They're a specialty cocoa brokerage and trading firm, but they also do cocoa and coffee and nuts. And we're going to be talking about a month in the life of a specialty cocoa trader. So hold on, we'll be back in just a few seconds. Hello and welcome. Technical details. You practice all this time and stuff happens. Hello and welcome everyone to this episode of The Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon and I'm here today joined by Maria Jimenéz Rojas. Maria, thanks for joining us today. I'm really, really excited. You and I have known each other for a number of years now. I'm trying to forget exactly when we first met. And I've had the opportunity to travel with you overseas. I've had an opportunity to visit with you in the headquarters in Zaandam. So welcome.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to see you. It's been a while, Clay, and I really hope that our paths will again cross live somewhere around the globe this year. It's great to be here, and actually, we've met each other, I think, already for 9 years, Clay. We met at Chocoa, the second edition of Chocoa, and they're celebrating their 10th anniversary this year. Mm-hmm. So it makes it 9 years that we've known each other. It's been quite a while.
It has been. So, I think my reason for getting together today is because of my involvement with the Chocolate Makers Forum at Chocoa. This will be its 8th year. There's always this question that is asked about people whose job it is to get cocoa from the places where it's grown to the people who are going to convert it into chocolate. But most of the conversations that I remember around Chocoa are mostly, when the questions get asked of people in your position, are what the farmers need to do in order to make a better product, so that will be more approachable to chocolate makers. And what I wanted today was I wanted to focus on, your job, what it is that you actually do. I mean, sourcing cocoa is a part of it. It's an important part of it, but it's only a part of it. And then I also want to talk a little bit about, what is some of the disconnect that exists between the expectations of chocolate makers and how they communicate with you about what they're looking for. And how you work with them in order to be able to get them the cocoa that they need, right? And I don't know if that's, from your experience, a different way of thinking about what it is that you do. I mean,
I love the fact that we're here, and that I told you I love talking about my job. It's just, we're jack of all trades basically, and what we do, as you well said, is not only sourcing. It goes so much further than that. And I think people sometimes forget that it's not only about buying and selling stuff, but there's so many things that are involved in this process, and that makes the job so much more rewarding, interesting, exciting. There's so many aspects to it.
Challenging?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah. I'd say that's one of the first adjectives that goes when talking about cocoa sourcing, and distribution.
So I want to remind people who might be tuning in live that you can go to the comments, whether you're watching YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook. If you have a question for Maria, you have a comment that you'd like to share, just put it in the chat box. We'll be able to get it up onto the screen during the course of the hour. Again, Maria, just quickly starting out, a little bit about you. Did you go to school to study cocoa? How did you get involved in the trading business? And from the conversation we had earlier this week, you really don't like to be called a trader.
No, no, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Okay. First things first. I'm from Costa Rica. I was born and raised there in San Jose. I was born on a coffee farm, surrounded by all kinds of citrus trees, fruit trees. My parents making all kinds of culinary experiments with whatever grew there. We had a herbal garden. So I was always surrounded by flavors and by all kinds of colors and all kinds of products. Also coffee, of course. I'm actually an environmental lawyer. I worked as an environmental lawyer for some years. I also did some development studies abroad in South Africa and Germany. And I ended up in the Netherlands, where I worked for UTZ. I worked for the World Fair Trade Organization. And after some years, I ended up at Daarnhouwer. They were looking for someone who didn't have this normal trader background, which would have been me. I had the sustainability background that they were looking for, and so I had already come into contact with cocoa via my environmental agrarian work in Costa Rica, but it was also a very it was from the outside, and of course you work with the farmers, you work on the ground. But it wasn't, I wasn't really involved in quality. It wasn't until I joined the Daarnhouwer team that I became fascinated by the aspects of cocoa quality. And then I started training from there on. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about this notion of quality here on The Chocolate Life, whether it was on Clubhouse or as part of this live series. So just cutting straight to the point, is there a succinct, concise definition that Daarnhouwer uses to describe cocoa quality?
We could dedicate a whole blog to a whole hour to that, but we won't. I think that quality is we use there's so many different ways in which you can evaluate quality. So you have your FCC regulations, which are basically the regulations that have been put out by the Federation of Cocoa Commerce. They have their offices in London, and most of our contracts, actually all of our contracts, are ruled by the regulations of the FCC. They have their own quality regulations, so that's one of the parameters we use. We also use the Cocoa of Excellence protocol to check the quality of our cocos. But of course, I mean, quality is also determined by the user itself. So the user will determine what kind of quality they want. So in this case, quality for us would be a determined. How could I describe it best? Well, flavor and flavor characteristics that they are looking for, we go and look for them. So in this case, the quality might be, for example, more industrial or more fine flavor. But in the end, it's also, and of course, we use all these protocols and regulations. But in the end, it's the client who wants a determined quality, and we go and look out for it. But of course, I mean, there's some things that we ourselves are very excited by, and we decided just to include it in our collection because we think that the quality is something that might attract, might be something nice for someone to use in terms of flavor or story. That's how we go about it.
So Daarnhouwer as a company has both a specialty cocoa business and a more traditional bulk business. So over the course of so I've known you're for 9 years now, and I've known you in the context of Daarnhouwer for those 9 years. How has the specialty side of the business evolved? And there are a couple of ways to do it. Sophistication of the buyer would be one. Sophistication of the sellers would be another. And also just the nature of how much business is there actually.
Mm-hmm. So many questions, Clay. I love this.
Well, I warned you that there would be questions.
Yeah, I know. And I just like this. All right. Where to begin? Okay. Starting from, Well, actually, I wanted to go back to what you described as bulk. Yes, we do what would be quality-wise considered as bulk, but we actually buy bulky cocoa that is certified. So think about organic certifications, UTZ, fair trade certifications. Actually, back in the day, we were the first ones who were able and willing to experiment with fair trade certified cocoa. That was in the early 90s, I believe, end of the 1980s. So we did that, and it's been quite an evolution. Actually, we started working with we've been working with cocoa since 1908. But I remember hearing all these stories from my predecessors, the former director, my former supervisor, who all told me about, the very beginning of these French chocolate making talents who were already generations into the chocolate business. And they started to be more aware of the way that they wanted to present their products, because, well, back then, Varona started promoting their single origin concept with their Madagascar couverture. So, back then they started together with Daarnhouwer thinking about about even more special ways in which they could promote their chocolate. So. I would be talking about the early 90s, mid 90s. That's when it all started. They had already been using all this cocoa, but this was then a concerted effort to look into ways in which they could then go more into depth into the single origin concept. So,
so can I interrupt here really briefly, Maria? Because Eric Case, I'm sure you know Eric, is listening in on LinkedIn.
Hi, Eric.
And he wanted to know, when was back in the day,
by
which he means, when did people start to want different kinds or grades?
Well, that's always been the case. But, talking about single origin, I would say then that we would have to talk about the 1990s.
So I'm going to push back on that a little slightly. Mm-hmm. And, Eric, just a little history. If you go back into the earliest recipes that we find for making chocolate beverages in the court of Spain, right, we see that they include, we want Caracas, right? So there is an awareness that particular origins have particular flavors, or, again, in the court of Spain, 1760s or thereabouts, the cocoa coming out of Nicaragua had a very, very, was held in very, very high esteem. So I think that there's always been this notion of origin, right? I don't necessarily know, what the history is of saying, we're going to think of these as criollos or forasteros. That I don't particularly know. And the particular kind of grading that we're talking about, the defects and things like that, grading, I don't think starts until there's actually a formal exchange, and we need a common language to talk about these things. So I would think they're fairly modern. But my understanding is that, Bonnat in 1983, for the 100th anniversary of their making chocolate, sort of is the beginning of the modern day single origin chocolate movement. Is that sort of your understanding of, and Eric, if that answers the question that you're looking for, is that your understanding, Maria? I just wanted to make sure that, part of the reason why I do this is I get a chance to learn from people who know more than I do.
And something I also wanted to add is, besides Bonnat, you also had Monsieur Bernachon, who back in the 50s, he also would travel to Venezuela, to Chuao. Mm-hmm. They were very, very keen in they really wanted to promote these flavors, and they fell in love with this concept of having Venezuelan Chuao for their recipes. But and I do agree with all what you said, and I think that particularly it's always been about flavor and less about grading. So mm-hmm. people would go for a certain origin or because they enjoy the flavor. There's generations of people who grew up with, they wanted a determined flavor. because it reminds them of old recipes, of old chocolate bars that they used to enjoy. Think of the Russians with their Red October chocolates. It was mainly Cuban cocoa, you know. It's all these flavors that people associate. So of course they kept looking for these origins, and their choices would be then determined mainly by flavor.
Gotcha. And we have a mutual friend, Elisa, and she sent me some invoices that are in the Bonat family archives from before the First World War, where there's correspondence about the purchase of cocoa from Chihuahua and places like that. And Eric comes back and says El Rey started in the 1930s with single varietals. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, if you have chocolate makers that are in producing countries looking to differentiate what it is that they're doing, and that may be true. I'm trying to find the first time. I mean, I personally think that when, in the port of New York, you used the cocoa that was in the port, right? So I think that a lot of chocolate has sort of naturally been single origin, right? Because it's what came in on the boat. Maybe it was single varietal. I don't know the answer to that question. But yeah, we can trace back this fascination with particular cocos and particular origins and particular varieties. It's pre-Columbian, pre the arrival of the Europeans in the New World. I believe that there was an awareness of these things, almost certainly predicated on what the final flavor is that we're going to be able to deliver. But it's interesting, I think, if we look, for example, at the history of coffee, and less so coffee, but wine, beer, spirits, bread, cheese, olive oil, balsamic vinegars. There's a tradition of connoisseurship which stretches back hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, before the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And cocoa didn't have that same sort of culture of appreciation. Right? Chocolate, as we know it, is a product of the Industrial Revolution. And so I think that one of the challenges we all face is that we're trying to create something, right, for this product that we love that hasn't existed before. It's a really, really interesting way to think about the problem we're facing. But I want to get back to you, Maria, because I know you like talking about your job, and I know you like talking about you. So when you're communicating with a small chocolate maker, I mean, one of the things that I think about when I think about using the resources of a firm like Daarnhouwer is that there are a lot of logistical challenges that are associated. I think there's some romance about the notion of buying directly from the farm without considering the logistical challenges of getting it from the farm to the port, the logistical challenges of getting it onto a container, making sure that all the documentation is taken care of, and all those other sorts of things that need to get done in order for cocoa to arrive at your factory in good condition. So in your experience, what are some of the more difficult mismatches? I mean, difficult is the wrong word. So what are some of the mismatches between the expectations of small chocolate makers, right, and your role to service their requirements?
Okay. I'd say that to begin with, many times they expect us to be able to, for example, deliver very small quantities of cocoa. We unfortunately are not able to do that because logistically it would be a nightmare for us, for the warehouse as well. So right now, the minimum order quantity we are able to offer is 1 bag. It's been the same way for decades now, but we can't break down bags, for example. That's still quite the challenge.
But you're actually importing pallets, not individual bags. I mean, you don't try to put 1 bag, right, from one origin onto a container.
No, it would be logistically, it would be it wouldn't be efficient. Cost-wise, it would be crazy. If there's someone who wants something that grows that's so rare that there's only 1 bag of it per year, of course we can. Yeah, we'll do the logistics for it. But if the quantities that are produced are a bit bigger, then of course we'll try to bring some more of that cocoa over to Europe. we do buy, for example, when we buy around a minimum amount of one pallet. That would be our minimum amount when buying, when sourcing. Think of, for example, single plantation criollos, which are slow growers. The volumes are not that great. They're prone to disease, that kind of thing. So we'll buy one pallet, for example, and those the logistics are amazing. You have to. Even though we have partners who help us out and we have a dedicated team, it's just sometimes it's amazing how much time it takes to get, and how many people it takes to get, for example, that single pallet from the Pacific coast of Mexico all the way to Veracruz. And then, and once it reaches the port of Veracruz, you still have to arrange the logistics from there. So it's always very exciting. It's there's never a dull moment when it comes to logistics, especially of smaller amounts. And well, as all of you might have noticed, this the COVID, the current political situations, they have all had a big impact in the logistics of everything, actually, around the world. So availability of containers, shipping lines charging 3-4 times as much as they used to 2 years ago. These are all challenges that we have to face, and of course you can't. You have to make prices still accessible to the chocolate maker. So, it's that's also quite the challenge.
No, I can only imagine. I mean, the price of shipping containers is exploded over the course of the last couple of years. And if you're bringing in small quantities, I mean, it's very difficult to what people call LCL, or consolidation. Can I put one pallet of cocoa beans into another container that doesn't contain cocoa beans?
Your stuff, Clay. Good.
What that?
Your logistical stuff. Good.
It's part of what it is that I do at TheChocolateLife. I get involved in a lot of different things. I think that this is the important. I can tell a cautionary tale, right? In this particular case, and perhaps Maria, of other tales for which you might not want to mention the people involved. I actually have two of them, two cautionary tales. One of them involves the Mass brothers here in the United States. They tried to move some cocoa beans from the Dominican Republic to the port of New York. So where's the deep water port? Probably on the South Coast. No, wherever it was. And they did it by sailing vessel because they wanted to make it really, really cool. And this was before they turned into hipsters, while they were still sort of Iowa farm boys with Nautilus branding, or not nautical branding, not Nautilus branding. And they had forgotten to file any of the necessary export paperwork or any of the necessary pre-import paperwork. And so it arrived in the port of New York, and Customs said, "Where's your paperwork?" And we don't have any. And they ended up threatening the loss of the entire shipment. Right. Oh. So they had to hire an independent consultant to come in, pay the fines, right, make sure that all the paperwork was done properly for them. But then they advertised how much they paid for the cocoa, right? And how much they paid for the cocoa included all the cost of all of their mistakes in there. It didn't actually cover what they paid at the farm gate. Right? So it's another tale. And something that I ran into with the FCC recently was a trading firm, for one reason or another, may have been negligent, and they had 4,000 metric tons of cocoa arrive from West Africa, arrive in the port of Antwerp, some of it in the port of Amsterdam. And there was a financial dispute about who was going to pay what. And according to the rules of the FCC, the Federation of Cocoa Commerce, which, if people are watching this and you don't know about the FCC and you don't know what the FCC rules are, you absolutely need to go download those just so you understand what they are. Even though you may or may not be covered by that ruling law. So Cocoa Merchants Association of America has similar kind of guidelines, but they're not as widely used. But what happened was there was cocoa in containers in the port of Amsterdam for a couple of weeks in the middle of winter. And when they finally got it off the port and opened up the containers, like 45% water damage,
Mm.
right, from moisture and humidity. So knowing hopefully you have not run into any kinds of problems like this, Maria, but I'm sure there are horror stories like this that you may or may
There's
not want
so
to share
many
with
horror
people.
stories. Yeah, it's a risk that's part of cocoa trade, and you have to know your shipping lines. You also have to know your insurance people, your logistics people. That's always very important. And what happens if the cocoa arrives completely damaged? What will you do with that cocoa?
Right.
Will you sell it? Because the first thing I remember I was told by my former bosses when I went to work at Daarnhouwer is, you never, nothing ever goes to waste in the cocoa world. Even if you have a big mass of pulsating mushrooms and and whatever, it's and this white mess of cocoa beans, that you can always sell it to the industry, but it's very tricky. It involves a lot of processing, paperwork, insurance people, all of that. I think that the most important when it comes to transportation as well is making sure that cocoa is well dried. But I mean, what are the chances that the chances that your cocoa will arrive safe and sound after being 3 months on its way to Amsterdam? Is pretty. It's always pretty exciting to you never know what to expect. I mean, and it's the way it is. If you're bringing cocoa from PNG, for example, from Papua New Guinea, or from Madagascar or Sao Tome, the connections are quite limited, and it takes ages for the cocoa to get here. So you're just waiting, and you're just following the little ship on on this world map. You're like, oh my God, okay, so now it's here in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, so it still has to go another 2.5 months, and you're just praying to the gods that that the moisture was okay, that the moisture measuring at origin was all right, and if it finally arrives sound at port, then it's a reason for celebration.
Yeah, we talked about the kinds of adventure and excitement that not necessarily we're looking for on a daily basis, but we find that.
Yeah.
I think you make a good point. If you are a small chocolate maker, one of the advantages of working with a company like Daarnhouwer is this experience in logistics, setting expectations properly, and understanding all the processes that need to go through. I mean, my involvement with this project that involved this 4,000 metric tons of cocoa, like sitting outdoors in containers for several weeks, was to go through and read all of the pre-shipment reports. So the company who had purchased the cocoa had hired a company to do cut tests and measurement tests before the cocoa went into the container, and then to inspect the container itself, and then to make sure that the container was dressed properly before the cocoa went in to the container. I mean, we're trying to find out from an insurance perspective who's responsible, so whose insurance is going to pay for the loss. Fundamentally, this is the challenge. But it's that which I think, just that alone, which makes whatever incidental costs which are associated with hiring professionals really, really important. So do you find that the people who come to you are confused by that? It's like, why is it costing? Or are they even aware about the difference between farm gate price, export price, landed price, delivered price, and those things?
Going back to one of the questions you posed, I don't know, I think it was 10, 15 minutes ago, about how things have changed throughout the years. The amount of information that is available to farmers and to chocolate makers is amazing. You know, it's all out there. I think people are very much aware of the costs of shipping of the cocoa at origin. I think that this whole technological advancement in the past 10 years has allowed people to connect in ways that you wouldn't have imagined perhaps 15 years ago, you know. So in that sense, I think that the people are a lot more aware of what this whole value chain entails, what the costs are. But I do think that sometimes people forget, you know, that there's also other elements into play. For example, delayed crops. We've been having a lot of problems with delayed crops in the past 2 years. You do see that this is a direct effect of climate change. So, you know, the weather patterns are changing. The harvest periods are also changing. It's all challenges that sometimes when you're not on the farm, you forget also that, you know, these kind of things also happen. So it's sometimes really so, you know, people hear, for example, that someone's harvest has been blighted by frosty pod disease, and then, you know, well, but when will the cocoa be available? Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, it's not like you cut everything off today and you're ensured that you'll have the cocoa in 3 months' time. It doesn't work that way, because end of the day, it's still nature, and it's processes that you have no control over to the whole extent of the process. So yes, things have changed a lot in the last years, and going back to the first question, then yeah, I do think that people are quite informed, although, you know, it depends on the sector. I think people who have been used to work with couverture, who want to do this switch from couverture to bean to bar, might be less informed about this whole chain of information, of people, of players in the market. Whereas people who have started as bean to bar makers usually tend to be overall more informed about this whole scene.
Gotcha. I want to remind everybody you're here at the Chocolate Life Live. We're talking with Maria Jimenéz Rojas of Daarnhouwer in Zaandam, which is just outside of Amsterdam. I would be remiss. I can see sort of cocoa pods behind us, Maria. And so I would be remiss if we didn't actually show some cocoa pods. So if you're new here, you may not know that for every single one of these live streams, I produce a post. And this is the post for this particular live stream. You can go to TheChocolateLife.com. And here's what the homepage of The Chocolate Life looks like right now. And you can just click on this post and you'll see here. And, you know, Maria, I mean, we talk about this. You and I had a wonderful opportunity back in 2016 to travel to Tabasco. So the capital of Villahermosa and a town called Comalcalco to visit in the Festival del Chocolate back there. And also the first concurso del cacao, looking for the best beans in Tabasco. Do you have any memories of that actual bean tasting? Do you remember that day?
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to share your thoughts about what happened that day? And then what we can do is going like, what are we doing here? So let's talk about the sensory evaluation of cocoa beans. So it was you were there. I was the head judge, so I wasn't tasting. It was a Stefan Bonat who's in this picture. And it was also Sophie Vanderbecken of Chameleon.
Yeah.
And Elisa was on the panel as well. You can't see it, but the hat with the green shirt is Zoe Papalexandratu, who is widely known. I was going to be a guest at Chocoa coming up, speaking about fermentation and things like that, the Central American Flavor Map project. But I mean, you know, Mexico has this fabulous reputation for great cocoa.
You forgot Chris Curtin on the photo.
I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. Christopher Curtin is standing in The blue shirt, for people who don't know him, Christopher is the founder of Éclat Chocolat, just outside Philadelphia. At the far left, we have um, Pepe Nieves. Sorry, Joe Snow, Jon Snow, who is the Minister of Tourism for the state of Tabasco. Me, and then we have I forget his first name. His last name is Spezia, which is the head of INIFAP, which is the agricultural research station. We're in Huimanguillo, which is in Tabasco. And we've spent part of the day walking through their research collection, grabbing cacao pods and bringing them back to one of the labs where we can go through and taste them. But just to give background to people, what can this is part of the job. It's like, how do you evaluate cocoa beans? And while you can evaluate cocoa beans by tasting them raw and then tasting them roasted, what you want to do is you want to see the progression of tasting them into liquor and then into
exactly.
chocolate.
And that's why we also have a cocoa lab at the office. And just to give you an idea of how things have evolved as well, when I started working 10 years ago at Daarnhouwer, there would be a cut test, there would be a raw, there would be some evaluation of raw cocoa, but just smelling it, And I remember asking my colleagues why it was that they weren't tasting it, and they told me, well, it's not our place as traders to do any tasting. That's part of the chocolate maker's job to do the tasting, So they would always send standard samples out to every single client, so they would be able to try the beans and evaluate the flavors and check whether everything was okay. And I remember also asking them, aren't you even curious about how they taste? Yeah, of course, but we're not really really trained to do so. And I asked them, well, would you mind if I were to start tasting the beans, even if it's just raw? Sure, go ahead. So we back then we had already it's like there was this library in front of you, and all the books were they had just read the index, but they didn't really read the contents. So that was so exciting, and it was the most. It was for me. That's when I. It's just a natural progression of things. You want to know what you're selling. You want to know what you're sourcing. You want to know what people want, and you want to help everyone around. You want to give the farmers feedback. You want to know what the chocolate makers are thinking when they try a bean and when they what they are looking for. So it's about a better understanding of all the needs from one end and the other. So. The best I think that the best teacher for me back then were actually Sao Tome lots that were awful with all kinds of mold. I remember learning so much about the different ways in which you can be a moldy bean, and how moldy beans taste. I mean, mold is amazing. It has such a broad spectrum of flavors, and of qualities, and also over fermentation, from hammies to poop to everything in between. It was just that was my first step into quality evaluation.
Well, I think that's a really, really very, very interesting point, and I'm gonna get away from the photo for a second, which is that I think that one of the challenges that one of the hurdles that I think many chocolate makers put in front of themselves is that I don't think they taste chocolate widely enough, but they don't taste cocoa beans widely enough. I mean, I think it's, I am notorious for saying, if you're a small chocolate maker and you're working in a melanger, you need to go lick the stones of your melanger. So you know what your melanger tastes like. So that if you taste that in your chocolate, you know where it's coming from. It may not be coming from the beans. So, the idea of I have moldy beans in front of me, I'm going to taste them because, I'm going to convert them into liquor. And what does that taste like? I think is a really, really important one. As long as you're not going to get sick, we do need to worry about that. So
Yeah,
I'm not right, but I'm not encouraging.
I did get sick. I did get sick, but just to make sure people won't do it back home. Don't do it always. But I mean, I've tried the nastiest stuff you can imagine.
Yeah. I just think that you need to actually taste a slaty bean. You need to taste a slaty bean and a quote unquote fully fermented bean, and then an over fermented bean from the same thing to understand that flavor progression. So I think there's a lot of value in understanding defects, not using them as like, if it's not 80% well fermented, it's not good quality, therefore I'm not going to purchase it, a didactic sense. But if you have something, for example, which is a high free fatty acid content, which means it's going to go rancid much more quickly, what does that taste like? I think is really, really important. So I think it's important for people to have the technical vocabulary, have an understanding, and then go move forward. I mean, is that something that you work with your customers to help educate them on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we share with them our findings, our lab findings. If they want to come over to the office and do a tasting with us, I usually recommend that to people who, for example, are switching over to bean to bar after having worked their whole lives with couverture. And it's so great to see these people's minds just blow when they're tasting the beans. They're like, oh my God, what have I been missing out on all these years? And that process, it's just magical. I just love that. And just trying the beans raw, doing the cut test, because part of this, of sharing this knowledge with the client, it makes them also learn more about what they really want. What is it that you want? Can you work with this quality? Do you expect this, or do you expect this? Can you live with this, or would you rather only work with beans that are at this level of quality? So it's about all of us using the same vocabulary, all of us using the same information, the same knowledge, so we can talk, and understand each other's understand their needs, and also communicate those needs back to farmers, know exactly what it is that everyone is offering and needing. And that matchmaking process, that's one of the things that's how I see myself, and that's why I don't like to be called a trader. I see myself.
You're a coco yenta?
I'm a matchmaker.
Okay, you are a coco yenta. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that's me.
And you work both sides of the equation. You're not just saying I have a bunch of candidates. Would you like to go meet someone? Right? It's great. I want to step back just a second and so just thank Eric, who's been watching all this time. He asked a very interesting question. Does it make economic sense, right, to import 20 tons in a short container? So containers are two sizes, generally 20 foot and 40 foot. And my understanding is you tend to put around 12 metric tons in a short container, around 25 metric tons in a long container. So I suppose the question is, does it make economic sense to just fill a short container? I mean, it may not make any economic sense not to fill a container, right? But my experience is there's no, general guideline that says you need to bring in this much cocoa in order to make it economically sensible. A lot will depend on what did you pay at the farm gate for the cocoa, who's buying the cocoa, and what they intend to turn it into. Exactly. And then what is the cost of the container itself? So there are at least those three variables.
And whether you'll have a market in the long run, because you can fill a 20-footer, but, will you be able to sell all that cocoa in the long run? Maybe not, so it wouldn't make sense from a financing perspective because, for example, your bank won't finance your stocks after a year. And that those beans will be around for more than a year if you buy a full container load. So, you have to take a lot more elements into account when looking at the efficiency of taking a full container load or not. And sometimes, even if you want a full container load, it won't happen because it's just not there. It's not happening. And you pray to the weather gods and you hope that they'll hear you, but hey, it's not gonna happen. So after
you do the rituals.
Right? Yeah, after 6-7 months, then you say like, you know what, let's do an LCL and let's just take what there is, and yeah.
Right. So that's another question. Are there specialist companies working in the ports that work specifically on LCL of cocoa beans? So again, LCL is less than container load. And so you're talking about taking 4 or more than 1 different lots and putting them in the same container. Now, in the United States, I think that's complicated because when it arrives at the port, there needs to be one physical owner of everything that's in there.
Correct.
So whoever is doing the exporting actually needs to become the owner of record of those cocoa beans for the purposes of the invoice. But again, are there specialist companies in the ports that do LCL of cocoa?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, and of course, I mean, nowadays you have so many actors in the logistical chain. You have your forwarding agents. You have all kinds of agents who will be more than willing to take ownership of the goods, you know, and do that for you. And in the case of goods coming into the Netherlands, then, you know, for example, you have the goods coming into Rotterdam. But the ships have to unload there, and then everything will be moved by, it moves either by barge through the canals into Zaandam, Amsterdam, or they'll transport it by truck.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So Eric has another question. Eric, thanks for all the questions today.
Yeah.
So he's asking you, Maria, did you come up with a vocabulary? And Eric, I think I need to know a vocabulary for what? Describing quality, right? So if you could be a little more specific, he says, because that's something we've been talking about. The industry, yes, has been talking about a vocabularies for quite some time. But, you know, as a part of your process, did you come up with something that you have formalized so that you have colleagues who are involved in the same process? But you want to talk about the same way with the people you're buying from, all the people who are handling the cocoa, right, on its way to you, and then your customers. I mean, did you develop, you know, a vocabulary? How difficult was that, you know, and how static is it? How is it evolving today?
You know, this is a discussion we had as a team as well, and we decided against it because we didn't want to create yet another set, you know, another protocol, another glossary. We just wanted to, we try to apply as much as possible like I explained before, you know, the Cocoa of Excellence protocols for evaluating the quality of liquors. We do some adjustments in the process as well, you know, in terms of roasting profiles, but, you know, we try to stick to the protocol and the FCC regulations. So in that sense, we try to use existing vocabularies that are out there so as not to make it even more complicated and fragmented, because we do believe that it is very necessary to have this this common language and this standardized language. And that's why we promote the use of already existing protocols and glossaries.
And I think if I can, you know, jump in here, one of the things about the Cocoa of Excellence approach is they're not looking at the cocoa beans in isolation. So they're looking at how the beans get transformed as a part of the process of making liquor, right? And roasting and things like that. Hello.
Right? This is my British short hair. She's gone. Sorry about that.
And no. We love photobombing by pets. And then they look at the transformation from the liquor into finished chocolate. In the end, we're eating finished chocolate. And so one of the things we want to do as a part of evaluation is, does this cocoa bean, not in isolation, but does this cocoa bean actually make good chocolate?
Exactly.
Right. So important for people. It is a recommendation if you haven't done it. What I will do is in today's post, so what I'll do is I'll click out of here. In today's post, what I will do is I will put a link to the Cocoa of Excellence pages where they talk about their protocols. If you do not know them, you should download them. Now, it's important to know that the Heirloom Cacao Preservation Fund, which is grown out of the FCIA, their protocols were developed by the people who developed the Cocoa of Excellence protocol. So Ed Seguin and Darren Suka and others. So you can get an understanding about how that happens. So if you don't know it, I'm also going to put a link to another book, which I have found. I was fortunate enough very early on to meet a gentleman by the name of Robin Dand. And Robin wrote a book called The International Cocoa Trade. So if you are all interested in getting involved in transporting cocoa beans for your company, just understanding logistics and understanding the markets. I mean, is there a better book than that one, Maria? I don't think that there is. I haven't run across one.
And he's such, this whole volume it's all you need to know before you start. Before you embark in this kind of adventure, so absolutely, I would definitely use that. And don't forget as well the publication by the ECA Caobisco, which has this annex for quality and flavor, quality evaluation and flavor profiling, which was also developed by Ed and Darren. So I believe it's their Annex B that specifies the whole process. So take a look at that. It's available online. If you could provide the link to that, that would be great.
I actually have a physical copy of it, and I can put the PDF on the page, and people can download it directly.
The PDF is online in 3 languages, by the way. It's
okay. So what I will do is I will go find the page on the Caobisco website, and I will go link to it. Again, an excellent resource for going. And again, this is one of the reasons to get involved with professionals, right, whose job it is day in and day out. I mean, one of my frustrations, is there are fabulous aspects of the community in craft chocolate, but there's a DIY Wild West component, which to some extent trusts the wisdom of the crowd more than it trusts the wisdom of professionals. And part of what it is that I want to communicate with Maria today, I do have an ulterior motive, other than the fact that she's one of my favorite people in the business, and we don't get a chance to talk nearly often enough. Was to talk about it's okay to get professionals involved. You can direct trade, right? And people are going to have to handle the logistics for you, right? And it makes sense because I want to jump into something. We got a couple more comments and questions from Eric in the last 10 minutes or so. But one of the challenges that I see for somebody who's managing their own logistics from the farm to their factory is the notion of mitigating risk. So you talked about, you have a contract which you might have prepaid, right, for 6 tons of cocoa, but it was a bad harvest and they only have 3. What do you do, right? Your caravan, you're in the Philippines, your caravan got intercepted and all the cocoa was stolen, right? It gets to the port, it's not packed properly, and it arrives, moldy and mildew, and you can't use it. So, so am I misunderstanding, the risk mitigation necessity that's going on here, or am I putting too much emphasis on it?
I do think that you have a point, but what I wanted to add is, of course, it's as a romantic, I think that it's absolutely, you're go for it. I'd say, give it a try, see whether it's your thing. Because there's some people who stick to it because they actually like the challenge and they like it. There's others who say, I have no time for it because I want to focus on making chocolate and that's all. But if you're enamored with this concept of having your cocoa coming directly to you, just go for it. I would say, explore it, go for it. See what it is, and decide for yourself whether you want someone else to do it after you've done it a couple of times, or whether you think, I can live with this, and this is something I can live with the risks. It's okay. A distributor like Daarnhouwer, of course, we do have we do have a role. It's about risk mitigation. It's about financing. It's about being able to offer everything in one go, so that you don't have to wait months on end to have your stuff. And of course, the logistics, the insurance, price fluctuations, what happens when the prices go up. And of course, I mean, when it comes to fine flavor, it's not always, you don't see these sharp price fluctuations, but you do see them when there's harvest problems, when there's volume problems, availability problems, logistics prices, these kind of things. And it's a changing world, and it's the world is always changing, and it's always, there's always shifts in social, environmental, political shifts, all these kind of changes happening. And you also have to be on top of all of that. So I do think, if you want to go for it, of course, I would do it as well, if I wanted to give it a go. But yes, we do have a role completely, and we're there to try to make this whole process as smooth as possible for everyone. Farmers usually prefer to sell bigger volumes because for them it makes a lot more sense to be able to have more cash, so that they can already pay in advance to their partners, if it's a cooperative, or to be able to invest in their own plantation. So in that sense, it and for them as well, it entails a lot of work if they were to be sending small volumes all the time to small chocolate makers. So they would rather, and it's also very expensive. So for them, it makes sometimes more sense to be able to send it out in one go. So, it has a positive effect on all sides, I'd say, to have someone like us be part of it. But if you're against it, of course, I mean, it's why not?
Well, I don't necessarily know I would say it's against it. I mean, so I think you made a really, really important point, which is about appetite for risk. So, if I'm a small chocolate maker, I already have the risk of, making chocolate and selling chocolate, right? And so to what extent does taking on the additional risk of being responsible for the transportation logistics, does that make sense? Is it something I want to take on? So, which is one of the reasons that, why I thought about it, can I actually qualify for can I get insurance on what it is that I'm doing? So, so that if something goes wrong, I mean, there are a couple of horror stories of small chocolate makers. And, Eric, you make the point, you have to be a big one in order to be able to do it yourself. No, I don't think you have to be a big one in order to do it yourself. It requires that you have some, real specific expert experience, like who do I talk to at the port of export to make sure that my 5 bags of cocoa get onto a pallet into a container. I mean, it requires that experience. So it can be done. And I think that, for example, when Askinosie started out, they handled all of their logistics, and they still do. When they started out their first couple of years, they were, 5-6 tons. I mean, not huge amounts of cocoa. They're bigger now, and you can do it. So I don't necessarily know that you have to be a big guy to do it.
No, not necessarily, not at all.
Right.
Yeah, but of course, I mean, I do think, going back to my point, it's if it's a choice you go for, let it be a very informed choice. That inform yourself, look at the risk, what are the costs involved, look at the whole chain, so that there won't be any surprises. Because that's the thing. Some people have come to us and they've told us, actually, we did not expect this. We didn't expect the beans to be moldy when they came to port, or we didn't expect that we had these additional costs. So if you're going for it, look for the right logistical partners in origin and in the country of destination. And also be very aware of the cost, because that can be sometimes, even for us, sometimes you get the invoice for costs, for extra costs that sometimes you didn't expect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What Eric says is no, just to make any money. And the answer is, if you're a bean to bar chocolate maker, that's different from being a profitable bean to bar chocolate maker. And of course, we need to know at what scale. I mean, Barry Callebaut is a bean to bar chocolate maker. right? Under one definition of that phrase. And so, but I've actually done some modeling work, looking at the cost of a finished bar of chocolate, and to be able to play with the cost of inputs. So what's the farm gate price, what's the landed price, and then what are the losses in production? So you look at raw beans into roasted nibs, right? And then you look at that into the recipe, and it turns out that you can go from, there's a wide range of costs in the beans themselves, where there's almost no impact on the cost of the finished chocolate bar. I mean, it really does depend on the labor involved in the transformation processes. And I think that that's something that that's sort of a myth, that, it's going to cost 50% more to make chocolate from $6 a kilo cocoa beans than it does from $4 a kilo cocoa beans. And in my experience, that's not the case. So I don't know, if you have thoughts on that, but I do want to get a comment from Carla, who says, it seems like producers take on the majority of the cost involved with risk. And then, yes or no, how do you shift that so that others take on and distribute the risk more evenly? Seems that is part of what a company like Daarnhouwer does. What can a chocolate maker or the industry do that still keeps it available to small makers? So there are several different questions in there. Do you want to take on the first one first, about the majority of the risk involved is on the producers?
Yeah, and I mean, looking at what we were discussing before, in terms of climate change, for example, that's I have seen the effect that has had on harvest for the past 2 years, even longer, and you do see a steady impact on harvest patterns. So yes, I do agree with that. It's producers are the ones who are carrying the biggest burden in the whole chain. They are the ones who have to wait out for their production to be ready to be shipped. They have to take into account all these different weather patterns, storms, droughts, excessive rain. Yes, and we are constantly talking to these producers to see, what. Right now, there is no standardized strategy in each country to mitigate climate change impact on harvest, on cocoa harvest, but like in general in their agricultural sector. And we are all very worried about it, because I do think that it's a problem that has been showing its ugly head already for many years, and we really are not responding at the right rate as we go. It is something, I don't know whether you guys are aware of it, but there will be there's an EU regulation that will be put into place shortly, which puts the responsibility into traders and distributors and actually producers of finished products, in terms of how much that product has impacted deforestation in the country of origin, and the due diligence that is put into practice in your company in order to mitigate that. So in that sense, that does give a lot of hope. It does set an example for the rest of the world. And I do think that is one very big and important step to being co-responsible with the producers and being able to support them in much more ways than just, buying or trying to give them technical support, because it goes so much more further than this. It's something that we all have to be part of.
And Maria, I think that on that message of hope, right, that there appears to be, I think you're referring to the European, what's called the EU framework for ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance structures, that this is a part of what it is that goes on. So the notion that there appears to be gaining traction, sort of a regulatory framework to be able not just cocoa, but in every agricultural commodity, for the manufacturers of finished products to be able to recognize the risks throughout their supply chain. And so working down the supply chain, people are going to have to be more responsible in terms of the kinds of information that they're required to provide, and that there should be more visibility. People like transparency. I prefer visibility into what it is that's going on. And as a part of that process, we can see some sort of structure, legal structure for change in some of the inequities that seem to be systemic at the moment. So I think that this note of optimism is a great place to end today. The hour shot by. Maria, we'll do it again, sometime soon. I'm really, really happy to have you here as my guest today. I want to remind people that if you're watching, please like, comment, subscribe, share what it is we're doing, grow the channel. Other people can find out about it. If you are, again, you can go to The Chocolate Life. You can find today's post. You can become a member and support. This is how these happens. There's always been a free level of support. Please go to. If you can support financially, then of course that is appreciated. I understand these are challenging times, but even becoming a free member shows the level of support for what it is that we're doing here. Eric was just bombarding the chat. You can go to LinkedIn, everybody, and I will respond in LinkedIn because I want to be mindful of Maria's time. Also, the fact that I'm heading to Boston shortly. It's my daughter's birthday last week, my birthday in a couple of weeks. It's Father's Day. We're having a big family celebration up in Boston.
Great.
So there will be no Chocolate Life Live on Tuesday because I'm not coming back until Monday afternoon, and I don't plan to do any of the work necessary to set one up for Tuesday. I'll put a notice on that on the Chocolate Life up here. If you are planning to go to Chocoa 2022 this year, you have not yet purchased your tickets, you can go to the Chocolate Life and click on this button for a discount code, and we hope to see you there. There is something I do want to say.
We'll be there if you want to drop by and say hi.
Absolutely, Maria, you're going to be in there. You're going to be there in person. I'm only going to be there virtually. What I want to close out is one comment from Eric, which it was absolutely very true. Is all chocolates are bean to bar, fundamentally when you get down to it. So somebody's converting beans and they're turning into chocolate at some level. All chocolate is bean to bar.
Absolutely.
And we just want to everybody to remember that. And also, I would like everybody to remember that if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you are doing it wrong. Until the next time, everyone, ciao.